Hi there, welcome to part 2 of my van tour video series. This time I'm going to cover a few bits and pieces that I only briefly covered. The first thing I'm going to cover is how to use one of these DRL controllers in a campervan. They can be quite useful for getting a D+ signal if you're not able to find or you can't get to an engine running signal in your van. It can be quite useful. I'm also going to discuss how I wired up my CBE unit to work alongside a Renogy MPPT combined DC to DC charger and disabling the onboard split charge, because I have AGM batteries and I wanted to look after them more carefully than a basic split charge system would offer. So there is a way of disabling those. There's a method that's mentioned in the handbook, but you can also do it using an external relay as well. But I'll just briefly cover that anyway to show you what I did. And there's also a couple of other bits and pieces which you'll discuss on there, how I use a relay to control my fridge, and also disabling the feed from the engine battery or starter battery to the back of the van using another relay. There's a couple of things you might find useful there. Okay, so how would I use this in a camper van to mimic a D+ signal? Okay, they're quite easy to wire up. They have a positive and a negative output and 3 cables coming into them via a fused feed. The yellow wire we can actually ignore in this case, because that's used if you have it in a DRL configuration for extra front lights. That would go to your dipped headlight beam feed, and so what it does, it makes the output 50%, so that it would dim the running lights on the vehicle when the headlights are on. But in this case we can just ignore that. And then this is a positive and negative feed from a 12-volt supply. So what I generally do, I normally tap into the cigarette lighter feed on these vans because it's really easy to get to behind the dash. If you whip off the cigarette lighter from the center console, you'll see it's got 3 cables. The thin cable is just used for the illumination of the ring when the headlights are on in the vehicle, which can actually be useful for a feed if you put in a third-party radio in and the feed in the van doesn't actually activate the dimming, but you can go on to that. That could be covered in another video. But the 2 cables you're interested in the back of the existing cigarette lighter are the 2 thick ones. One's positive and one's negative. So you just go into that feed and tap into those, or you could just ground this somewhere else in the van. And then what will happen is the output from this will only become live when the engine's running, because the starter battery, the voltage across that will be around 13.2 and above volts. And this is a standard alternator, not a smart alternator. That's slightly different. So what that means is that the feed only becomes live when the engine's actually up and running and settled down. If you go straight into ignition live feed directly, say on the back of the cigarette lighter, what will happen, that feed will become live straight away, and it will actually go up and down. The voltage across that will actually fluctuate, and you can actually get relay chatter and anything it's connected to. So what these CBE units actually do, they rely on that D+ signal to turn off the lights and also activate the split charge system that's built in. So if that voltage going into that is going up and down when you're starting, you can get a bit of relay chatter inside the box, and that can actually be a bit damaging. So what happens is the van will only give that feed to the CBE box when the engine's settled down and running. So that makes life a lot better for the CBE box. But you can also use that for other bits and pieces in the van. You could possibly, some of the earlier generation Renogy combined DC to DC charger and solar panel controllers, if there was solar present going into the controller and the engine is running, you would never get more than, say, if it's a 50 amp one, you'd never get anything more than 25 amps as soon as it saw the solar on the van. So what could happen is you could have a a fairly sort of like dull day and you're not getting a full 50 amps out of the box. So what you can do, you could disable the input from the solar to the box using something like this via relay, and that makes sure you're getting your full potential voltage, full potential current out of your controller to charge your leisure batteries up. So that's possibly another use for those. If you haven't got a CBE box, you may want to use something like this to turn the lights off and any awning lights via relay as well, because the regulations state really you shouldn't be able to turn the lights on inside the vehicle when the engine's running. So you could use it for that. Now that's actually built in the CBE unit, so that's actually quite handy. But yeah, it's used for turning some of the auxiliary power supplies off on the CBE unit, but it's also used to activate the onboard charger. Now, because we're going to disable that onboard charger because we're going to use our DC to DC charger. Now, in the manual, there's actually a resistor that you can actually remove down here, and that will disable it. Now, it is suggested that you put a pair of snips on that. Now, in a previous life, I worked in electronics, and I never used to like snipping components off PCBs in case of stress. By doing that, created a fracture around any other components. So I actually unsoldered mine. Alternatively, you could use this good old box again, go through a relay system to disable the connection between the engine battery and the CBE unit when the engine's running, just so it's only disabled that connection when the engine's running, because when you get back on site, you want it to be reconnected, because once the leisure battery is fully charged, this will actually start off to go on and charge your starter battery. So it's quite handy that if you got on hookup for a few days, once the leisure battery is fully charged, you're never going to get a flat starter battery, because the CBE unit will carry on topping up the starter battery. That's quite handy. In addition to that, I've got 2 bites of the cherry, because my Renogy box, once the leisure battery is fully charged, it'll go off and start charging the starter battery. It doesn't matter that there's 2 devices. They don't fight with each other to charge the starter battery. Once either of them see that the starter battery is fully charged, you'll just say, oh, my work's done, they'll just go away and stop doing anything. So it's not a cause of a problem. In the manual, they're actually quite difficult to get your head around, these CBE units, but the first thing I would actually recommend bear in mind is mass means chassis earth. So these rely on a chassis earth for the return, as well as one connector for all the components coming back to the control unit. And then you've got the chassis earth there, you've got the leisure battery, and then you've got the van, or it's called car battery in here, but it's actually the starter battery. So once you get your head around that, it's quite easy to understand. You've also got a connection for sensors in the water tanks. I've got an underslung grey and fresh water tank, so there's a sensor in both of those, and I'll show you that on the panel a bit later on. There's also a connection off to the panel from the box, which you've seen the panel up there. And there's also, this is a thing we mentioned before, this is where you can put in the D plus feed, which we're mimicking with this. So that works quite well. And there's also other bits and pieces you might want to take a note of. Is these units are set up so you can use them with a 3-way fridge. Now, a 3-way fridge, the 12-volt side of that only wants to be live when the engine's running. So there's a couple of ways you can achieve that. You can not fit that link there, because that makes it permanently connected. So when the engine's running, you can either connect that to your fridge, and there's the most modern Thetford fridges actually have a D plus signal. You can use one of those, or you can actually use one of the outputs from this as well, and you can use that for things like steps and things like that. If you've got an external step you want it to draw in when the engine started, that'll do that. But if you imagine we're using an ignition feed from a leisure battery, that would be going on and off all the time, because sometimes if the van's been stood and the starter battery goes right, like say 10 volts when you're cranking the engine, that's going to go, the step's going to be trying to go in and out all the time until it's settled down. So that's why I always suggest you either use a mimicked CBE, sorry, a mimicked D plus signal, or you go away and connect it properly in the van. If you can find an auto electrician or a workshop manual, may be able to tell you. But this is how I do it on these several vans, the Boxer, Relay, Ducato, etc. So that's how I wired up that in basic terms. These allow for a split between lights like front and rear. I've got that in mine. The only thing I don't have running through that are my roof lights. I know these roof lights have got water sensors in, or rain sensors, but the last thing I would want to happen is if I forget to turn this unit on and there's rain coming in and that sensor hasn't worked, I want to be able to draw these down quickly so they don't go through the CBE box. I've also got a permanent live feed to my Kuma box as well, because I want to be able to remotely monitor what my leisure battery is up to using the Renogy app, which we'll cover in another video. But my Renogy control panel supports Wi-Fi, so I can keep an eye up on the van what it's up to remotely using Wi-Fi and over the internet. So that's really useful. That's the reason why I've got two of these shunt displays. I didn't want to take that one out because it's going to leave a great big hole there unless I can think of something else to fix it, fill that hole up. So that's why I've got two running alongside each other. And as I mentioned before, there's two shunts are actually in series, so there's very little in the way of interference, because there's going to be very little in the way of voltage drop between the two and any loss. So it's going to be, it's not worth worrying about for the object of the exercise. So that's what I do there. Okay, I'm sorry if you can hear in the background noise, but a farmer has just decided to start ploughing the field behind me, but hopefully you can hear everything. Okay, so this is the control panel for my CBE unit. As you can see, it's actually quite a nice display. It looks quite professional. In fact, some manufacturers such as Wild Axe, etc., do actually use these panels in the van. So if you're a DIYer, you can actually get quite a nice professional looking control panel in your van. So what these can actually do, they can actually monitor the levels of the water. So at the moment, my waste tank and my water tank are reasonably healthy. I can also see what my leisure battery is up to. Now, because it's connected to solar and the mains, which is signified by that little light there, my leisure battery is quite healthy, and though you can also see what my starter battery is up to as well. That's the switch for the pump, the water pump, which I've got a SureFlow 30 psi pump in the back of the van underneath the bed, and that's my awning light. And all I've used for my awning light is some waterproof LED self-adhesive strip actually stuck in the gap between the sliding door and the van. It's a lot cheaper than paying £40–50 for a proper awning light. Works just as well, and when the doors shut you can't even see it, so that works for me quite well. You can also turn the brightness down at night with that switch there, so that works quite well indeed. So what I've also got, I've got a switch there to turn my fridge on and off. What I've got a very short run of cable between my leisure battery and my fridge, so that minimises any voltage drop, because compressor fridges are quite sensitive to any voltage drop. So by keeping the cable short and using a relay between the leisure battery and the fridge itself, that means that I've very little voltage drop. And I've also got a voltage regulator in that feed, so which means that I've got a constant 12-volt supply regardless of whether the voltage increases, which it does naturally when you've got solar and your engine is running. It means it's a constant 12-volt, which is actually quite handy for the fridge. It's quite healthy for it. What I can also do here is turn off the connection between the van battery and the Renogy box, which is useful if I just want to use the solar or if I'm doing any diags. Again, that is through a 60 amp relay, which is way more than I would actually get going through the relay, because after all it's only a 50 amp charger, combined charger anyway, so that works quite well. Okay, so this is my Renogy display panel. With it supporting Wi-Fi, I can actually see what's actually going on in the van remotely, and it's actually got a network sitting in here, and you can actually see the network in the van. And I've actually got a Kuma box, so I've got permanent Wi-Fi in the van. That, as I mentioned before, was on a permanent feed, so even if everything's turned off in the van, I can still see what's going on with that. I also use that feed. That feed is actually powered from this cigarette lighter socket here, and again that will go off to my cool box if you ever want to run that. So hopefully that's given you a bit of a background of how the CBE unit works in the van. Okay, this is my Truma controller, and again you can see that I've got mains going into the vehicle here. So I've got two places where I can actually see where the hook is actually connected to the van or not. That's quite handy. What I normally do at this time of year as well is, because it gets frosty at night, I normally leave that set quite low to just a minimum, just to make sure there isn't any frost in the vehicle. Even though I do drain my water tank, I do think it's healthy, and at this time of year it's just definitely worth doing. Okay, what I'll cover in the next video is setting up this Car Your Pride unit. Because I have it connected to my phone's Bluetooth, I can still use the steering wheel controls to skip tracks and adjust the volume when I'm driving, which is probably all I want to do when I'm on CarPlay. So that's what I do there. If to the right of the central vent there, you'll notice a little switch. What that does, that turns off the DRL lights on the front of the van. Because how these work, as I mentioned before, is when the voltage across the starter battery gets over 13.2 volts, for the sake of argument, it will actually close the circuit and it'll power on the lights. But the trouble is with that, when the starter battery has been charged by anything else in the van, the lights would be coming on even when it's just sat there doing nothing. So I can just disable that DRL controller under the bonnet. Once you find a way to route the cable through, there's actually a grommet on the left hand side near the glove box, which is quite easy to feed through bits and pieces backwards and forwards between the cabin and the engine compartment. I've just bought these third-party self-adhesive aluminium trim pieces because it just brightens the van up a little bit. I've retained my cigarette lighter on the vehicle there because that powers the Car Your Pride unit. But on the right hand side there's a USB, which I got from Amazon, a USB charger. Really easy to fit. You don't even need to modify the hole. What you need to do is just need to go in there and tap into the cables. So remembering the fat and the thin ones, sorry, the two fat cables are the one you want. The thin one is for the illumination of the socket if there's a cigarette lighter there, so you can just ignore that. We can also see in this van there's also a control panel there for the air suspension. Both sides are separate, so I can possibly use a system for leveling the van to a certain degree, but I generally just keep those on the same level. The system's inflated with a standard car pump. I've got an electric one to make life a lot easier. I'm just keeping the boot. And the center blanking panel is one of these. You can actually get an upgrade, and you can actually get one with a built-in compressor, which I didn't think was necessary, but because it works just as well. And I very rarely disable the piggybacked off that feed there on the back of that switch is a wire. It goes to the reversing camera feed to the Dolphin system. Essentially, the camera on the back rear facing acts like a rear view mirror when you're driving along. When it gets a signal from the reversing lights, i.e. via the beeper, the camera will switch over to the reversing camera, so it'll point down onto where the bumper is. So that works quite well too. If you don't really want to remove the resistor from the system board on the CBE unit, You could possibly use a relay and a DRL controller to disconnect the feed from the starter battery, or you could possibly put one of those rotary isolator switches in there. But you'd have to remember to turn that on and off as needed, so I don't know whether that's be worthwhile or not. Well, if you've got this far, thanks ever so much for watching this video. If there's anything else you want me to discuss or show you in the next video, let me know in the comments below. Next time I should be discussing what was involved with the Solway panels and bits of woodwork and what I use for travel seats, and also the reversing camera. I'll cover that in a bit more depth. Well, thanks ever so much for watching. I'll see you soon.